I used to believe that unconditional love was the foundation of family. It was the one thing I could count on, the love between a mother and her child. I gave up so much of myself for my family. I sacrificed my dreams, my time, my freedom, all for them. I was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every heartbreak, and every joy. I thought I was doing what any mother would do, loving without limits. As I reflect on my life, I realize that I built my world around my husband and our daughter, Amanda. Every meal I made, every holiday I planned, every dollar I saved, it was all for them. We lived in a house we built with our own hands in a small town that felt like home. But when Mark, my husband, passed away from cancer, everything changed. I thought that I still had Amanda. I thought we could lean on each other. But life, as it often does, had a different plan. When Mark died, it felt like the floor vanished beneath me. The grief consumed me, and for a while I was lost in it. But then I told myself, I still have Amanda. She needs me. She was all I had left. So I made the decision to sell our home, the place Mark and I had dreamed of, and moved in with Amanda and her husband, Chad. At first, Amanda seemed genuinely happy to have me there. She and Chad offered me a place to stay while I figured things out, and I was grateful. I wanted to be strong for her, to give her the support I knew she would need in her own way. But it didn't take long before I began sensing the tension in the house. Chad barely acknowledged me. I tried my best to stay out of the way, to not cause trouble. I cooked meals, cleaned, offered to run errands, all in an effort to make myself useful. But nothing felt right. The coldness from Chad was palpable, and the way he looked at me sometimes made me feel invisible. Worse yet, it made me feel like a burden. I tried to ignore the small things at first, the way Chad would roll his eyes if I asked him a simple question, or how he would change the TV channel when I was watching something, as if I didn't matter. But then one evening, it all came to a head. We were sitting at dinner, and I had made chicken pot pie, Chad's favorite. The meal was meant to be a comfort, a symbol of love. But the silence around the table was suffocating. Out of nowhere, Chad broke the silence. Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity. You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills to pay. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I froze. I turned to Amanda, desperate for some support, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. I was drowning in shock, and my heart pounded in my chest. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Chad's words hung in the air, cold and final. And then Amanda, my own daughter, said something that cut deeper than anything Chad had said. Maybe it's best if you find something more stable, for everyone's sake. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I stood up from the table, my heart heavy in my chest. I walked back to my room, packed my things, 2 suitcases, that's all I had left, and I left. I didn't cry right away. The tears didn't come until I was standing outside in the cold, shivering, realizing that I had nowhere to go. Amanda didn't walk me out. Chad didn't even look up as I left. I sat on the curb, staring into the emptiness, trying to process the weight of what had just happened. I had given everything to them, and now I was nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, the kind where the wallpaper peels and the vending machine eats your change. I didn't have the strength to cry, not yet, but I could feel the pain welling up inside me. I felt invisible, erased. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her family now sat alone in a rundown motel room with no one to turn to. The next day, I sent Amanda a message, telling her I understood and that I would always love her. But there was no reply. Days turned into weeks, and still there was nothing. I applied for jobs, but no one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her 60s. I thought about cleaning houses, babysitting, anything to make a living. But my body just didn't work the way it used to. The loneliness was suffocating, and the shame I felt for being cast aside was even worse. I had given everything to that girl. How could she turn her back on me so easily? But that's when something shifted inside me. While going through a box of old keepsakes, trying to find something to cling to, I stumbled upon my mother's old diary. I hadn't read it in years, maybe never. But something drew me to it. As I turned the pages, I found a name, a secret, a truth that would change everything. The shock of what I found in that diary stirred something deep within me. For the first time in months, I smiled. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they had no idea what was coming next. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like, but what happened next, it shattered me. I wasn't prepared for it. I never expected that the one person I thought I could rely on, the person I had loved and cared for all these years, would turn her back on me so easily. And what made it worse was that I wasn't even allowed to fight for my place in her life. It wasn't just Chad. It wasn't just the coldness of a man who didn't see me as family. It was Amanda, my own daughter. Days turned into weeks, and I kept texting her. I sent calls, updates, little things. I never expected her to ignore me completely. But that's exactly what happened. I was completely cut off, as if I didn't matter anymore. I began to wonder if she had truly moved on without me. What was I supposed to think? How could I be erased so easily from her life? I kept myself busy. I tried looking for work, but no one was interested in hiring a woman in her 60s with no recent work history. It was as if I had disappeared from the world altogether. I thought about doing small jobs, cleaning houses, babysitting, anything to make a few extra dollars, but nothing felt right. I felt like I was stuck, like I was invisible. Then one evening, while going through some old keepsakes, I found something that would change everything. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It wasn't just a memory. It was a truth, one that had been buried for years. My mother's diary. I hadn't opened it in ages, maybe never. But something pulled me to it. As I flipped through the pages, I found a name, a secret, a revelation that made everything clear. The shock of what I found in that diary stirred something deep within me. For the first time in months, I smiled. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't know it then, but that night, everything changed. When I found my mother's diary, I stumbled upon a truth that wasn't just about who I was, it was about who I could become. For so long, I had been trapped in the role of mother, wife, caregiver, pouring everything I had into others and leaving nothing for myself. But that night, reading those words, I realized something important. I wasn't just the woman who had been abandoned. I was also someone who had the strength to rise again. It wasn't just the discovery of my heritage that shifted things. No, it was more than that. It was the realization that I had been giving everything to everyone else for years, and I had forgotten to care for the one person who truly mattered me. For so long, I had tried to bury my own dreams and desires, putting them aside for the sake of family, for Amanda. But at that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in a motel room, waiting for Amanda's approval, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she would come around. I was done being passive. It was time for me to take control. I started small. I cleaned up my life, both physically and emotionally. I cleaned out my motel room, started organizing my things, and slowly, I made decisions that would help me take control again. I began reaching out to old friends, the ones who still remembered me before I became just Amanda's mother. I started attending local events, joining book clubs, anything to remind myself that I was still part of the world, that I still mattered. It felt strange at first to do things for myself instead of for others, but over time, it became more natural. One afternoon, I met up with an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't seen in years. His name was Peter. He was kind, funny, and surprisingly easy to talk to. We went for coffee and I found myself laughing, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. It was simple, just two people reconnecting, but it felt like a breath of fresh air. Peter didn't see me as a mother or a widow. He saw me as Margaret, a woman who had a life before all of this, before the sacrifices, before the pain, before the loneliness. Peter and I kept in touch after that day, meeting up for dinner now and then talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, I began to feel alive again, not just as someone's mother or someone's caretaker, but as myself. The more time I spent with Peter, the more I realized that I had forgotten what it was like to feel seen and appreciated. He didn't just see me as someone to take care of. He saw me as an equal. And it was freeing. As I spent more time with Peter, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had buried for years. My love for painting, my interest in travel, the dreams I once had before life had taken its toll. We talked about the future, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream again. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. It was mine, and it was the first time in years that I was making choices for myself. I also began taking care of my finances. For too long, I had allowed Amanda and Chad to control what I did with my money. But no more. I started budgeting carefully, making sure that I was financially independent. I even signed up for a class on investing, learning how to manage my money in ways I had never considered before. For the first time, I understood what it meant to take control of my financial future, and it felt empowering. One evening, after an exhilarating afternoon of learning about stocks and real estate, I sat in my small but cozy rented apartment. It was simple, but it was mine. I had decorated it with the things I loved, from the paintings I had done to the cozy blankets I'd collected over the years. I felt proud, and more importantly, I felt peaceful. As the days passed, I continued to take small steps forward. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't doing this for Amanda or for anyone else. I was doing it for me. Slowly but surely, I was finding myself again. The woman who had been erased, the woman who had been invisible, was coming back to life. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that I had lost a part of my family, a part of myself, but what I also knew was that I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. I was going to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future, even though I didn't know exactly what it held. What mattered was that I was on my own path now, and that was enough. As the days passed, I started to notice something that I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't a grand, overwhelming feeling, but it was there, a quiet, persistent presence in the back of my mind. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living again. For the first time in a long time, I had a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations. Peter and I had become closer over the last few months, and I found myself thinking about him more often. It wasn't the kind of love I had with Mark, the kind that shaped my entire life. No, this was different. It wasn't filled with the weight of obligation or sacrifice. With Peter, I felt free. He reminded me of who I had been before I became consumed with caregiving. I remembered my own wants, my own needs, and with him, I felt seen for the first time in a long time. But I still had lingering doubts. Was I making the right decision? Was I just looking for someone to fill the emptiness left by Amanda? I wasn't sure. I didn't know what I was searching for, only that I needed something different. Something for me. One day, as I was walking down the street, I found myself standing outside a small art gallery. It was a cozy little place, tucked between two larger buildings. The windows were filled with vibrant paintings, and I could see a few people inside, admiring the work. Something inside me stirred, an old passion, a long-forgotten dream. I had always loved art, always loved creating, but I had never pursued it. Life had gotten in the way, as it tends to do, and my art had been pushed aside in favor of other things. Other people. I stood there for a while, watching the people inside. The idea of going in, of taking that first step towards something I had always wanted, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. What if I was too old? What if it was too late? But then I realized something. If I didn't try now, I never would. I had nothing to lose. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, I was greeted by a young woman who looked at me with curiosity, but without judgment. I glanced around, taking in the paintings on the walls, the bright colors, the stories captured in every brushstroke. It felt like a different world, a world that had always been inside me, waiting to come out. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. I smiled, feeling a little nervous but also excited. "I used to paint," I said quietly. I think I want to start again." She smiled warmly, and I immediately felt at ease. "We have a class starting next week. You're welcome to join us." I left the gallery with a new sense of determination. I wasn't just going to sit around waiting for something to happen. I was going to make things happen for myself. No more waiting for permission. No more putting off my own dreams for the sake of others. I was taking this step for me. That evening, I called Peter. We talked for hours, and as we spoke, I realized how much I had changed. I wasn't the woman I had been when we first met. I wasn't the woman who had been afraid to live her own life. I was stronger now. I had my own voice again. And I had learned to say no to things that didn't serve me, even when it meant stepping away from those I loved. I didn't tell Amanda about the class. I didn't tell her about anything new in my life. Not yet. I wasn't hiding it from her. I just knew that this time, I wasn't living for anyone else. This time, I was living for me. As the days passed, I threw myself into the art class. I hadn't felt this alive in years. The sensation of holding a paintbrush, of creating something from nothing, was exhilarating. Each class, each stroke, reminded me of who I had been before everything changed, before my life was defined by others. I wasn't just Margaret, the mother. I was Margaret, the artist. I began to feel a quiet sense of pride as my work evolved. And it wasn't just about the paintings, it was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. It was about proving to myself that it was never too late to start over, to try something new, to be someone new. One day, Peter and I went for a walk after dinner. We strolled through the park, our laughter filling the air as we talked about our favorite books, our past travels, and the dreams we still had. And as we walked, something inside me clicked. This was my life now, not in the shadow of my past, but as something new, something exciting. I'm glad we met, Peter said as we sat on a bench by the lake. His voice was soft, genuine, and I realized he wasn't just talking about the small connection we had formed. He was talking about the new beginning we were both living. I am too, I replied, smiling. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally living my life again. And it feels good. We sat there in the stillness, watching the sun set, each of us silently reflecting on the new chapters of our lives that were just beginning. It wasn't perfect. I still had a long way to go, and the pain of losing my daughter would always be a part of me. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix me. I was fixing myself. I was finding happiness again, one small step at a time. And that was enough for now. The days began to blur together as I continued on my path of self-discovery. My art class became the anchor of my week, a time when I could completely immerse myself in something that was mine and mine alone. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of rebellion, an assertion of who I was, who I had always been beneath the layers of roles I had played throughout my life. But even as I started to find joy in painting again, a voice in the back of my mind kept whispering doubts. What if it was too late for me to start over? What if I never found my place again? The questions would surface during quiet moments, especially late at night when the world was still, and I was alone with my thoughts. I had always been the one to give, to sacrifice for others. Could I really turn around now and focus on myself without feeling selfish? Was I being foolish to believe I could have a second chance at happiness, at love, at purpose? Peter noticed the changes in me, the quiet moments of uncertainty that would flash across my face. He was patient, never rushing me, always encouraging but never forcing me to move faster than I was ready. One evening, as we sat on my small apartment balcony, sipping wine and watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Peter asked, "What's going on in that mind of yours?" I hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. I'm not sure I know how to do this. To be happy. To put myself first without feeling guilty. I'm scared, Peter. Scared that it's too late for me to truly change. Scared that I'll make a mistake and lose everything again. He set his glass down and looked at me with a kindness that almost took my breath away. You're already changing, Margaret. You've already started, and I think you're doing great. And it's never too late, not for anything. You're allowed to put yourself first. You've spent your whole life giving. It's time for you to receive. I felt a warmth spread through me at his words, but the doubt was still there, lurking. But what about Amanda? What if she never comes back? What if I've lost her for good? Peter reached across the table, gently placing his hand over mine. You can't make someone love you. You've done everything you could for her, Margaret. And sometimes people need to find their way. even if it's not the path you want for them. You're allowed to move forward, with or without her. His words were a balm to my weary heart. I knew he was right. I had given everything to Amanda, but somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. Now, I had the chance to find me again, to embrace my own life and my own happiness. But that didn't make it easy. The guilt was a constant companion, even when I told myself I deserved more. The following week, I attended an art exhibit, a small local gallery showcasing the work of emerging artists. I had never been to an event like this before, but it felt right, like another step forward, another way to say I'm here. I matter. As I walked through the exhibit, my eyes were drawn to a painting, a beautiful landscape of rolling hills and a sun setting over a calm river. The colors were soft but vibrant, a perfect blend of light and shadow. I stopped in front of it, captivated by the way the artist had captured both stillness and movement. I was so absorbed in the painting that I didn't notice the woman beside me until she spoke. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft and thoughtful. I nodded, still mesmerized. "It is. It feels like it captures the quiet moments we often miss." She smiled, and I turned to look at her. She was older, around my age, with a quiet elegance about her. "That's exactly it," she said. "Sometimes, the most powerful moments are the ones we don't expect. I'm glad you see it too." We continued talking for a while, and as the conversation shifted, I learned that she was one of the artists featured in the exhibit. I found myself sharing my own story with her, the journey I had been on, how I had rediscovered my love for painting, and how difficult it had been to put myself first after so many years of giving everything to others. She listened intently, nodding in understanding. "It's never easy," she said after a pause. "But the most important thing you can do now is to keep going. Keep painting, keep creating. Don't stop because of the doubts or the fears. Let your art be your voice, even if no one else hears it at first. What you create is yours, and it's enough." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had worried about how others saw me, how Amanda saw me. But this woman, a stranger, reminded me of something I had forgotten. My life, my choices, my art were enough. They didn't need to be validated by anyone else. That night, I went home and picked up my paintbrush. It had been too long since I had felt the rhythm of the brush against the canvas, and as I painted, I allowed myself to feel the joy of creation, free from the pressure of pleasing anyone else. It was just me, my art, and the quiet satisfaction of doing something because it made me feel alive. The next few weeks were a blur of color and creativity. I spent hours in my small studio, surrounded by canvases that told stories I hadn't realized I needed to share. The doubts began to fade, and the voice in my head that told me I wasn't good enough grew quieter with each stroke. I was doing this for me, and that was enough. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from my lawyer, who had been helping me with the legalities surrounding the inheritance my mother had left me. I opened it, unsure of what it might contain. As I read through the letter, my heart raced. The assets, the trust, the properties, everything my mother had set aside for me was now officially mine. I felt a rush of emotions, surprise, gratitude, and disbelief. But more than anything, I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't just standing on my own anymore. I had financial security, a future of my own making. I wasn't dependent on anyone else, and for the first time, I felt like I had control over my life. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of everything I had overcome sink in. The road ahead would still have its challenges, especially with Amanda. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, I was strong enough to face it. The days were starting to feel like they were falling into place, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was doing things right. I was finally learning how to live for myself. I had taken control of my art, my finances, and my time. But there was one last piece of the puzzle I hadn't fully confronted: the relationships that had defined so much of my life. I hadn't heard from Amanda in months. It was a silence I had grown used to, but that didn't make it any easier. I didn't know what I expected from her. Was she supposed to apologize? Was I supposed to forgive her? Every time I thought about it, I felt torn. My daughter, my flesh and blood. was still out there living her life, and I was stuck in this limbo, trying to figure out how I fit into her world now. I had spent so many years being the one who was always there for her, the one who kept the family together, the one who always had to be strong. I had given and given until there was nothing left for me. And now, I was finally learning to be strong for myself. I wasn't going to be anyone's afterthought anymore. But that didn't mean I didn't miss her. It didn't mean I didn't long for the days when she was just a little girl, when she looked at me with love and admiration, when she needed me. Now, it felt like she only saw me as a burden. One afternoon, as I was finishing a painting, I sat back and admired the strokes I had spent hours perfecting. I had never felt more proud of a piece of work. It wasn't just a painting, it was a reflection of me. The colors blended together with a kind of harmony that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I wasn't just painting what I thought people would like. I was painting for myself. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Amanda. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever it might say. "Mom, can we talk?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep doing what I was doing. After all, she had ignored me for so long. Why should I make it easy for her to come back into my life? But the truth was, I still loved her. And no matter how much I had changed, a part of me would always want to hear from her. I took a deep breath and typed back, "I'd like that." When? We set a time to meet, and as the days passed, my mind raced with possibilities. What would I say? What did I even want from her? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this conversation be about me begging for her love. I wasn't going to fall back into that place where I gave everything and got nothing in return. The day we were supposed to meet, I sat at the cafe, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. My stomach was a tight knot, but there was a quiet strength inside me. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. When Amanda walked in, she looked different. She had the same face, the same eyes, but there was a weariness in her expression that I hadn't seen before. She looked older, not just in years, but in the weight of responsibility she was carrying. She had grown up in ways I hadn't realized. She walked over to the table, hesitated for a moment, and then sat down across from me. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I know I've hurt you. I've been selfish, and I should have reached out sooner." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the little girl who had once depended on me for everything. But that didn't mean I didn't still see glimpses of the girl I had loved with all my heart. "You're right," I said, my voice steady but calm. "You should have. But you weren't the only one who needed to make changes. I've changed too. I've had to learn to live for myself, not just for you, not just for anyone else. And it hasn't been easy. It's been painful, but it's also been the most important thing I've ever done." Amanda looked down at the table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her cup. "I know, Mom. I've been so caught up in my own life that I didn't realize how much you were giving up for me. I didn't see it until I had to stop and look." I took a deep breath. "It's not just about you, Amanda. I spent so many years living for you, for your father, for Chad, for everyone else. But at some point, I lost myself, and that's not something I'm willing to do anymore." She nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I know, and I want to change. I want to be there for you, Mom. Not just when it's convenient, not just when I need something, but because you're my mother and you deserve more than I've given you." I felt a flicker of hope, a small but real spark deep in my chest. It wasn't the resolution I had expected, and it wasn't going to erase all the pain of the past months. But it was a start. It was the beginning of something different. Maybe not the way things were before, but maybe that wasn't necessary. Maybe this new version of our relationship would be stronger, built on boundaries, respect, and mutual care. I looked at her and smiled, a smile I hadn't realized I was holding back. "It's a start, Amanda. That's all I need right now." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation lingering between us, but it wasn't a bad weight. It was a weight that came with healing, with acknowledgement, with the possibility of something new. When we left the cafe that day, it wasn't a happy ending, but it was a step forward. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life, not just in the decisions I made, but in the relationships I chose to nurture. And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The weeks that followed our conversation were a strange mixture of hope and hesitation. Amanda and I had started talking more, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. There was still so much distance between us, but it was different now. We had both begun the slow process of healing, and we both knew it would take time. I was learning to be patient, not just with Amanda, but with myself. I had been so focused on taking care of everyone else for so long that I had forgotten to give myself that same kindness. I spent more time painting, which continued to be the most therapeutic outlet for me. Each stroke of the brush brought me closer to my true self, the person I had forgotten, the person I had almost lost. I began to paint things that had been buried deep within me. Memories from my childhood, moments from my marriage with Mark, the small, quiet moments that made me feel alive. They weren't just paintings anymore. They were pieces of my soul. One afternoon, as I was going through a box of old photos and keepsakes, I came across a pile of letters that Mark had written me during the early days of our marriage. I hadn't seen them in years. I had put them in a box, tucked away in a corner, long after he had passed. As I opened the first letter, the familiar handwriting took me back to a time when we were young, full of hope and love. The words he had written to me were filled with affection, dreams, and promises for a future we had planned together. I felt tears well up in my eyes as I read his words again, remembering the life we had shared, the late-night talks, the quiet mornings, the simple joys that had once defined our life together. I had spent so many years focused on being a mother, being strong, that I had pushed all those memories aside. Mark had been my partner, my best friend. I had loved him with all my heart, and even though he was gone, a part of me still carried him with me. I realized then that I hadn't fully let go of that part of my life, the life we had built together. I had buried it under years of sacrifice and obligation. But now, as I read those letters, I understood that I didn't need to bury it anymore. I wasn't just Margaret, the mother or the widow. I was Margaret, a woman with a past, with a story, and I was allowed to honor that story. I wasn't just the sum of my roles. I was a person who deserved to live fully, to embrace every part of who I had been and who I was becoming. Later that evening, I shared the letters with Peter. As I read them aloud, I felt a deep connection to Mark, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace. It was like I had closed the last chapter of a book I had been holding onto for too long. But instead of feeling sadness, I felt gratitude. I had loved and I had been loved. And that was something I would carry with me always. Peter listened quietly, offering only gentle words of comfort. When I finished reading, he took my hand and said, "You're so strong, Margaret. I admire how you've kept going, how you found your way through so much pain. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." His words were a balm to the old wounds that still lingered in my heart. I had spent so much of my life carrying the weight of everything on my own. And now, for the first time in years, I felt like I could let go of some of that weight. Not all of it. There were still things I needed to sort through. Still a long way to go in rebuilding the relationships I had neglected. But I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. A few days later, Amanda came over to my apartment. She had been quieter lately, and I couldn't help but wonder if something was on her mind. When she arrived, she didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she stood in front of me, her hands clenched tightly around the edges of her jacket. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "About everything. About what you said. And I'm sorry. I've been selfish. I've taken you for granted for too long. And I know I can't undo what I've done. But I want to try to make things right." I looked at her, seeing the earnestness in her eyes. There was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. "You don't need to apologize," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I needed to make changes too. I've been holding on to you and this idea of what our relationship should look like, and I've neglected what I need. And that's something I'm working on. We both have to work on it." Amanda nodded, her eyes beginning to glisten. I just want you to know that I'm here, Mom. I want to be part of your life, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard too. I know I haven't been there for you the way I should have, and I want to do better. For the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of relief. It wasn't an instant fix. I knew it wouldn't be. But it was the beginning of something new. A new understanding, a new connection, one that was built on mutual respect and, most importantly, love. I'm glad to hear that, I said, my voice softening. I don't expect everything to be perfect, but I want us to try together. I'm here, Amanda, but I also need you to understand that I have to live for me too. That's something I didn't realize until recently. I can't keep losing myself in the process. She nodded again, more resolutely this time. I get it, Mom. I do. And I want to be part of that. I want to see you happy. It was a simple conversation, but it was one that carried more weight than I could have anticipated. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Amanda and I were on the same page. Not in the same place, but on the same path. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settling in. I was reconnecting with my past, with the person I had been before the years of sacrifice. I was honoring those memories, not letting them define me, but letting them be a part of who I was. The past was still with me, but it didn't control me anymore. I was finally free to move forward, one step at a time. The weeks after my conversation with Amanda were filled with small, quiet shifts. We talked more, shared more, and I slowly began to see glimpses of the woman she was becoming. But as much as I wanted to believe that everything would go back to the way it had been before the distance, before the hurt, it wasn't that simple. The truth was, we were both learning how to redefine our relationship, and that came with its own set of challenges. There were moments when I would catch myself slipping back into old patterns, being the mother who gives everything, who sacrifices herself without question. And then there were moments when Amanda would retreat back into her old habits, distant and wrapped up in her own world, leaving me wondering if anything had really changed at all. One afternoon, Amanda called me to invite me over for dinner. I was excited, hoping it was another sign of things improving between us. But when I arrived, something felt off. Amanda was there, sure, but so was Chad, sitting at the table with his usual air of indifference. And there was an unfamiliar tension in the room that I couldn't ignore. I tried to push it aside, focusing on the meal we were preparing together. But as the evening wore on, I felt myself slipping into that familiar role of being the invisible woman, the one who was expected to keep the peace, to do what needed to be done without rocking the boat. I served the food, cleaned up, and laughed at their jokes, even though I could. At one point during the meal, Amanda casually mentioned her upcoming trip. Oh, by the way, we're going away next week. Chad's mom wants us to come visit, so we'll be out of town for a few days. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just that she was going away, it was the fact that she had mentioned it so nonchalantly, without considering how I might feel. It was as though I was just another part of the household, another thing that could be moved around to fit their plans. I tried to hide my feelings, but it was becoming harder to ignore the growing sense of being pushed aside. I see, I said, keeping my voice calm, but the knot in my stomach was tightening. I guess that's nice for you both. Amanda's face softened, but she didn't seem to fully understand the impact her words had on me. I know, Mom. I'll miss you. We'll catch up when I get back. I promise. But the promise felt hollow. There was a distance between us that we couldn't seem to bridge. And as I watched Amanda and Chad chat about their plans, it hit me. Maybe it wasn't just about me trying to reconnect with her. Maybe it was about her trying to reconnect with the idea of us, the idea of what family should look like. But I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to what we once had. After dinner, I made an excuse to leave early. I'm just feeling a little tired tonight, I said, forcing a smile. But enjoy your trip. I'll be around when you get back. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness rise within me. I wasn't angry at Amanda. I was angry at myself for letting this happen. I was angry that, after everything, I still felt like I was fighting for a place in her life. I had spent so many years giving, so many years putting myself last, and yet here I was still fighting for her attention, still hoping she would see me. It felt exhausting. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window. The world outside was quiet, but my mind was a whirlwind. I thought about the conversation we had had a few weeks ago when Amanda had apologized, when we had both agreed to try and rebuild. But now I realized that what I had thought was a new beginning was actually just the start of a long, complicated process. I had changed, that much was clear. But Amanda hadn't yet fully grasped the changes I had made, or what they meant. She was still holding on to the version of me that had always been there, the version that was willing to sacrifice everything for her. And I wasn't sure how to make her see that I couldn't keep doing that. I couldn't keep losing myself in her. I couldn't keep waiting for her to validate me, to fill the void that had been left when I gave so much of myself away. I wasn't the same person I had been before. And maybe that was the hardest part, to accept that we weren't going to magically revert to what we had been. Maybe that version of our relationship was gone forever, and we needed to figure out what the new version would look like. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. I was done being the afterthought. I was done letting myself be pushed aside because of someone else's expectations. It was time for me to stand firm in my boundaries, to stop waiting for Amanda to come around. I loved her and I always would, but I couldn't keep waiting for her to love me in the way I wanted. That afternoon, I reached out to Peter. We hadn't talked in a few days, and I needed to hear his voice to remind myself that I wasn't alone in this. He answered right away. "Hey, Margaret," he said, his voice warm. "How's everything going?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "It's tough," I finally said. "I'm still struggling with what's happening between me and Amanda. I thought we were making progress, but sometimes it feels like we're stuck." Peter listened quietly, and when I finished, he spoke softly. "It sounds like you're starting to set some boundaries, and that's hard, but I think it's necessary for both of you. You've given so much for so long. It's time for you to decide what you need, too." His words resonated deeply. I had spent so many years living for others, trying to make everyone else happy, that I had forgotten about my own needs. I wasn't just the mother, the caretaker. I was Margaret, someone who deserved love, respect, and space to be herself. Later that day, I sent Amanda a message, telling her that I needed some time. I told her that I loved her, but I needed to focus on myself for a while. I didn't know if that would help her understand, but it was the truth. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace in saying it. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay with being treated as an afterthought. It was time to reclaim my place in my own life. The weeks following the message to Amanda felt like an emotional roller coaster. I had taken the step of setting boundaries, but it wasn't easy. I had spent so much of my life bending to the needs and expectations of others that doing the opposite, putting myself first, felt foreign, almost selfish. But with each passing day, I realized that I was starting to breathe again, starting to feel like myself again. For the first time in years, I was rediscovering my own worth outside of my role as a mother or a wife or a caregiver. Peter was a steady presence during this time, offering encouragement but never pushing me. He never tried to fix things for me, but simply allowed me the space to work through my feelings at my own pace. I appreciated that more than I could say. He wasn't a savior, he was a companion, and that made all the difference. One evening, after another art class, I sat in my little studio apartment, surrounded by my paintings. The room was filled with an air of quiet accomplishment, each canvas a reflection of my journey, of all the things I had been too afraid to confront before. Some of the paintings were abstract, others landscapes, and some were portraits of women, strong, independent, resilient. I had never allowed myself to paint anything so personal. But now, it felt like the only way to truly express who I was. I was in the middle of adding the finishing touches to a painting of a woman standing tall against a stormy sky, her arms outstretched, embracing the winds, the rain, the uncertainty when my phone rang. It was Amanda. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since I'd sent that message. She had respected my space, but I could tell something had shifted. I answered, taking a deep breath before speaking. Hello, Mom. Amanda's voice sounded different, softer, more vulnerable. I've been thinking a lot, and I realize now how much I've taken you for granted. You've always been there for me, no matter what. And I haven't been there for you. I, I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. I miss you. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. It was the first time in months I had heard her express this much emotion, and I knew she was speaking from a place of sincerity. The walls we had built between us, both of us in our own ways, were starting to crumble. I miss you too, I finally said, my voice steady but soft. But Amanda, we can't just go back to how things were before. I've changed, and I think you have too. This is going to take time. She was quiet for a moment before responding. I know, but I'm willing to do the work. And I want to be part of your life again. Not just when it's convenient for me, but all the time. I've been so focused on myself, I lost sight of what really matters. There was something different in the way she spoke, no longer defensive, but open, vulnerable. It made me realize that for the first time, we were both ready to rebuild our relationship, but this time on equal terms. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be difficult conversations, more boundaries to set, more healing to do. But I could feel it. There was hope again. Hope for something new, something better. Let's take it one step at a time, I said, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We don't have to rush. But I'm here, Amanda, and I always will be. We agreed to meet the following weekend, just the two of us, to talk more, to start fresh. As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep sense of relief. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step, a real one, and that was enough. In the days leading up to our meeting, I continued to paint, but this time, I didn't feel the weight of past sacrifices holding me back. I wasn't painting for anyone else. I wasn't painting to please Amanda or anyone else in my life. I was painting for me, for my own healing, for my own happiness. The night before our meeting, I stood in front of my easel, looking at the portrait I had been working on. The woman in the painting was different from the one I had started. She was no longer just standing against the storm. She was embracing it, holding her ground, but with a soft smile on her face. The storm was still there, but she was no longer afraid of it. She was no longer fighting it. She had learned to live with it, to accept it. I smiled as I stepped back from the canvas. It was finished, just like me. I wasn't the same woman who had been tossed aside by life, who had spent years feeling invisible and unimportant. I had embraced the storm, faced the pain, and found a way to stand tall in the midst of it all. The next morning, I met Amanda at the cafe. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, and her face softened. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I'm glad we're doing this." I smiled, sitting down across from her. "Me too." We talked for hours, just the two of us, without rushing, without worrying about the past. We talked about everything. Our fears, our hopes, the things we hadn't said before. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally seeing each other again. The sun was setting as I sat by my window, looking out at the quiet streets below. The light was golden, soft, and I could feel its warmth on my face. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace that had been so elusive for so many years. It was as if the pieces of my life were finally falling into place, not perfectly, not without pain, but in a way that felt right. And for the first time in a long time, I could honestly say I was happy, not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally learned how to live for myself. The past few months had been a journey of rediscovery, of painful confrontations, of setting boundaries, and of learning to let go of the things that no longer served me. I had learned that healing wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming your own life, your own voice, and your own joy. I had spent so much of my life being defined by my roles as a mother, a wife, a caretaker. But I was Margaret, and that meant I was allowed to be more than just those things. I was allowed to be me. And as I sat there reflecting on how far I had come, I realized something important. This wasn't just my story. This was the story of so many women like me. Women who had given so much of themselves to others that they had forgotten who they were. Women who had been told they were too old to be loved, too invisible to matter, too broken to heal. But here I was, standing in front of my own life, stronger than I had ever been, rediscovering the woman I had always been, and the woman I was still becoming. So, to all the women out there who feel like they've lost their way, who feel like they've been cast aside, who feel like their best years are behind them, I want you to know something. It's never too late. It's never too late to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, to find your voice. It's never too late to start over, to rediscover your passions, to find love. Even if that love starts with yourself. You are worthy. You are enough. And you don't need anyone's permission to be happy. I spent so many years believing that my worth was defined by my role in others' lives. But now, I know that my worth comes from within. It comes from the love I give to myself, from the choices I make to prioritize my happiness, from the courage it takes to let go of what no longer serves me. The past will always be a part of me, but it doesn't define me. I define me. And as I walked into the next chapter of my life, one that was still uncertain, still full of questions, I did so with a sense of purpose, of hope, and of strength. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need to. I knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The road ahead was mine.